Hello, everyone, and welcome back to TTRPG Talk, a relatively new live stream that I'm doing here, where we are picking a topic relevant to TTRPGs, whether that's D&D or Call of Cthulhu or Shadow Dark or Lancer or what have you, and we're chatting about it. This is a pretty informal sort of conversation, so if you're new here, please feel free as we chat to toss your own ideas into the chat. I love when this thing is a dialogue, so please feel free to chime in. That being said, I'm rjcurrer. I'm your host, as always, and the conversation that I wanted to have tonight is I wanted to talk about some aspects of the creative process that I don't get to discuss regularly. And in my admittedly incomplete research, I don't see a lot of other creators talking about either. The creative process is a pretty individual one, but I think that there's some elements to it that can be universal. And we spend a lot of time talking about sort of the structures and the tools and the tips and all that kind of stuff, but we don't always talk about some of the stumbling blocks and some of the jumping off points, the origins, if you will, and then kind of what comes after you're done creating something. What do you do then? And so tonight I wanted to talk a little bit about that. If you are familiar with my Monday live streams, you'll know that I talk a lot about the creative process there, but I'm talking about my creative process there, which is going to be necessarily different from your creative process because shock horror, we're different people and different things are going to work for you than work for me. And so I don't always get to discuss some of these points. So I want to talk a little bit about the importance of knowing yourself in your creative process. I want to talk about where ideas come from. And I want to talk about the ugly phase of creating artwork. And I do consider TTRPGs an art form. If you're writing TTRPG adventures, in my vernacular, you are an artist. Congratulations. That's your medium. And then I want to close off, if we've got some time, talking a little bit about editing yourself, because that's a really hard thing to do too. And I think that it gets short shrift a lot in the TTRPG space, even though it's a really important element. So let's go ahead and dive in. Know thyself would be the first mandate of any creative process. And it's where I want to start our conversation tonight, because the creative process, as I mentioned, is really personal. It's going to be specific to you, a sample size of one. And so one of the things that I don't always get to address on my Monday night streams when I'm talking about my process is that it's not a universal process. My process is not going to work for you, most likely. You're going to have to make tweaks in it. And anybody else's process that you follow is going to be different for you as well. There are going to be some things that work and some things that don't. And the only way to figure that out is to experiment, is to try different techniques, different styles of doing things and working your way through. And, well, frankly, fucking it up. Messing up and making mistakes and figuring out where you fell short, where something didn't work for you, or even better, hopefully finding the things that do work for you, finding the things that make a difference in your style and in your process and help you move forward in a really constructive way. And one of the first things that you might want to investigate for yourself, one of the first things that really made a difference for me in kind of knowing myself in the creative process, didn't come from the TTRPG space. It came from the creative writing space and the fiction space, which I do in my free time, what free time I have. And that is sort of what is in the novel writing space known as being a pantser versus a plotter. And I have made sort of very brief addresses to this in the past. If you've kept up with my live stream, I don't talk about it a lot because it doesn't always come up in my style. But it's an important thing to kind of know about yourself, and I want to sort of take a minute and kind of talk about what those two things are intended to be. In fiction writing for a moment, not TTRPG, but fiction writing, a pantser is somebody who just sits down and does a brain dump, and they kind of have what maybe sometimes it's called a vomit copy, where they just kind of pour all of their ideas for this story out on a page, and they just kind of let it all spill out without any kind of form or style to it. And then they go back and they adjust it as necessary. Whereas your plotter is going to be the one who sits down and makes an outline and builds out from that. And you might be wondering kind of how that applies to TTRPGs because they are not novels, and you should not write them as novels. It's a very different process. But the approach is the same, because you're going to find that either you're the kind of person who needs to take all of the ideas that are going on up in their brain here, all of the things that are cooking, and kind of lay them all out on the page, and then go back through and find the ones that work, find the gems among all of just the stuff, and kind of whittle down from that just that burst of ideation. In that case, you might be considered a pantser for the purpose of TTRPGs, or you might find that you're the kind of person that has a very narrow idea. You have maybe a one-sentence idea about something, and you need to put those down and then bloom outward from those particular bullet points. And so knowing those things about yourself are really important to figuring out how you work and how your creative process is going to function. And I think that's something we don't talk enough about in the TTRPG space. Is there's a lot of do this, then this, and then this, the 5-room dungeon, the 5+5, the all kinds of different structures out there that are tools, but really they're tools to be melded into your own unique creative process. And learning how your mind works is one of the first big steps in creating a process that works for you, that is uniquely your own. So let's see, we got a couple comments in the chat already. Jonathan Frost, I'm about 6 minutes late. Have you differentiated between mechanics versus implied setting when it comes to development? I have not, but that's another really good point. Let's talk about that in a second here. Then Amanda Sterner says, I'm a word vomit type person. Then I have to reorganize and reformat. Had no idea there was a name for it. Yep, there is. And one of the things that I really encourage people to do when you're working in any artistic space is pay attention to mediums that you don't do and how they address some of this stuff, because there's some really cool thought processes out there to get around universal problems. And so I learned that from the novel writing space. But there's something we're going to talk about here in a little bit is kind of the ugly phase of your work, and that's going to come from more visual art space, but it still applies. So to that end, let's jump back here real quick and let's talk a little bit about the differentiated between mechanics and implied setting when it comes to development. So Jonathan, it's actually not something I had kind of on my roster for tonight, but that's a really good point. One of the things that I think comes up a lot in the sort of general TTRPG videos is, how do you make a mechanic for something? How do you create a framework for something to exist in your game? And you don't always need to do that. If you're, and again, this is going to kind of come down to know thyself, because if you are the kind of creator who needs a mechanic to kind of explain to you personally, not to your players, but to you, how something works in your world, then that's a valuable thing to spend time creating. I have some good friends who are DMs who really like to have those mechanics in place. They like they are your clock, maker sort of DMs where they like to figure out how everything kind of works together and kind of clicks into space. Uh, and then spending some time on those mechanics is really important. I am more of your I wouldn't necessarily call it the implied setting, but I'll call it the social engineer sort of style in this, where I'm less concerned about creating a mechanic for something and how it works, and more interested in figuring out how I incentivize my players to engage with the structure of the setting that I have developed. I'm more interested in social engineering their attitude and their actions as opposed to coming up with the actual mechanics of how something works. And again, that comes down to kind of knowing myself and my creative process. It is a waste of time for me to spend a bunch of hours burning through mechanics and really creating these details because I know that I'm one, gonna mess them up myself. And two, I'm going to get in game and I'm going to decide they don't work exactly how I want them to work, and I'm going to throw them aside. And I'm going to come up with something in the moment anyway. Um, and that's just my style. But that's a really good point, Jonathan. Something to know about yourself when you are working in a TTRPG space or in any creative space. Um, cool. I hope that answered some of your questions with that. So knowing yourself is a really important point. Um, and it's going to kind of guide how you move through the rest of your creative process. Specifically, it's also going to impact how you come up with ideas. Um, because one of the really cool things that we get in um, in TTRPGs that we don't get with a lot of other sort of creative media is you have you have the collaboration of your players as you're working through a process, and so you have this external source of ideas and how things are going to work because they're interacting with the world and they have expectations and they have ideas and they have theories and they have their own map for how the world pieces together that is probably different from your map. And as long as you can kind of get them to share that with you, it's a really cool place to draw inspiration from. And they'll have their own character goals and their own things that their characters want, whether that's just a wish list of magic items or whether that's things like they want to see more dragons in the world because it's Dungeons and Dragons, darn it, and there should be dragons in here. That kind of thing is a really great source, and I think that's primarily what gets talked about a lot in the TTRPG space. But and it's not to be discounted, right? But it's not the only place that you're going to come up with ideas, and to be completely frank with you, it assumes that you already have an idea and that you've already have kind of this world that's going and it's evolving because you need to have something in place already for your characters, for your players to kind of bounce off of, for them to come up there, for them to interact with, and then for them to come up with their own ideas on. And that doesn't mean that you're running what I'll call a narrative adventure, meaning something that has a very kind of fixed plot that we need to get from, point A to point B in, something that is like a published adventure in a lot of cases. But it's important, even if you have one that's more of a sandboxy kind of world, you need to have ideas for how that world works and what exists in it and what kind of challenges happen there. And there's a lot of places that you can go to get ideas. Once again, I think some place that I go to quite a bit is I watch a bunch of other creators, not in the TTRPG space, but outside of that, I try to look for media that I don't work in because there's a whole different thought process that goes into those various kinds of art, and I find that when I'm working on my own stuff, in whatever media I'm working on, whether it's TTRPG or fiction, what have you, if I go outside of that, I find things that don't yet exist in the space that I'm working in. And so whether that's movies or music or artwork or what have you, those are a great place to go and kind of get these very slim kernels of ideas, these little threads that kind of grab you and tug at you, that you can work with later. And they are simple things like, the one that we're working on right now in our Monday night stream. One of my initial ideas for that was Payne's Gray, um, and that's just a color. That is a tube of paint that I happen to be learning a little bit about, studying watercolor, right? And just the nuance of it, and just it kind of stuck with me, and how it's blended and what actually goes into making it, and yada yada yada. I'm not going to bore you with all those details, but it just kind of stuck in my head, and I just had this idea of this world where you have just all of these shades of Payne's Gray making this hellscape of a domain, right? And so you'll find little things like that out and about in the world, and you take something like that, and then you work on some of your brainstorming techniques. And the way that I've always taught brainstorming, and I do on Monday night, and I don't want to talk about it a lot because I talk about it there, but is that free writing process of you take an idea and you just let your brain wander on the page as you write down everything you have to think about on it. But there are other techniques for that too. I'm going to talk about this in a second. We get another comment in the chat. Jonathan Frost says, writer's block is my issue here. I might want to create a setting or adventure, but inevitably I miss key aspects. How much of a framework is enough to allow a player to inspire you during play? That's a really great question. And the answer is, it's going to be really personal in terms of what you can come up with on the spot. You need to understand your world, but you don't need to understand all of it. You just need to understand more than your players know, right? So in the beginning, you don't necessarily need a whole lot. You just need to know the things that your players are going to interact with. And frankly, one of the sneaky benefits of a session zero, one of the reasons I'm a big advocate of doing a session zero for games, is you can kind of mine your players for ideas then before you've written the adventure as a whole. So you can kind of, lay out for them your idea of what the world is going to be and let them think you have more of it built than you do. All right. But just, you can lay out for them, the pantheon, because they're probably going to need that if you've got clerics or paladins or what have you, although I'm not a strict stickler for paladins having to have a deity. The basic geographic environments, sort of, so your rangers know, are we in forests or mountains or swamps or what have you. A little bit about how the politics work and the civilizations that are there. And again, you just need a bullet point or so of information, just enough that you're going to tell your players about. And if there's some significant lore that's important to your world, knowing that as well. But I mean, we're talking 1 page of content here, really, maybe 2. I've heard some people argue that up to 5 pages of information on a world is really all that you need. And to me, that seems like a lot, because I'll be honest with you, I struggle to get my players to read 1 page of information about the world, much less 5, right? So of just a small primer bit of detail for them, and then let their imagination go and ask them to come up with character backstories and that kind of thing. And they'll invent all sorts of things that you can go, oh, yes, that of course existed in my world before. Yes. And so just a little bit of information is enough, just enough to get them thinking and imagining. You mine all that at session 0, and then you now have another great source of ideas to help kind of stave off writer's block. I will tell you that I think the number one trick to dealing with writer's block comes at this ideation phase. And for me, it's the free writing thing. It's the just write down everything that's in your brain. Let your mind wander on paper. And that's why I advocate free writing so much, is because at first you're going to say, I don't have anything to write down. And so write down, I don't have anything to write down. again and again and again until your mind wanders, and then write that thing down. And the first time you do this, it takes a long time, I will tell you, the first few times. And then you get better at it like anything else. And it becomes so much simpler to kind of find the kernel of idea that you had to start with, and start chatting with yourself about that. But I've talked about that a fair amount in my other live streams when we've done our own brainstorming. So I want to talk about some other techniques that you can use too, because sometimes you aren't really sure what your thought process is on something. And so, one of the things that you can do is start with a trope, right? Start with something that is so universally common to the genre that you're working in, damsels in distress, and, dragons, holding hordes hostage, and yada, yada, yada. Take that trope, write down a list of all the things that we expect from that trope, right? Just jot them all down. You know, damsel in distress. She's a princess. She's in a tower. She's being held by a wicked witch, right? Any of that kind of stuff. And then make another list where you invert those expectations, right? She's not a princess. She's a prince. She's, it's actually the king who's held hostage. The king is the one who's in distress. It's not held by a wicked witch, but the witch is actually a good witch, and it's the royalty that they're holding that is actually the evil one. And just kind of flip those on their heads. And some of those you're going to kind of roll your eyes at as you go. But a few of them may kind of give you ideas for twists. And then that kind of brings me to my other technique here when I'm brainstorming is I will frequently, especially if I'm struggling against writer's block, I won't start at the beginning. I start in the middle. What do I envision to be the twist in my adventure? What's the thing where everything kind of goes sideways for my adventurers? And I'll start there because that gives me a point from which I can work from. And I'm a plotter, right? So one bullet point is enough for me to start building a tree out of. But one bullet point is enough to start kind of churning those gears if you're more of a pantser, to really start having that conversation with yourself. So what are you going to change mid-adventure on your characters? What expectation are you going to subvert? What are you going to flip on them? Because once you know that, you now know that you need to get there, which gives you an implied course to get to that point. And then you know that it's going to need to come to a resolution. So you have another implied course as you move in the other direction. So if you can know that before your adventure starts, awesome. Sometimes that is enough to get you kind of working backwards to all of the information that you need at the beginning at your session 0. Because it could be simple stuff like the return of a god. Okay, well, then we know that one of them had to be missing, if not all of them missing, right? And now that gives us that little bit of information that we can kind of reverse engineer. And that's another great way to brainstorm, is to not worry about doing it linearly, right? Not worrying about doing it from the beginning and working your way towards the end. I hope all that helps, because I want to move on. We're getting closer to time here. We're probably going to go over the normal 30 minutes that I planned for this. I guess I put more into this than I thought. I guess it goes to show I'm wordier than I give myself credit for sometimes, or more long-winded, I should say. And I want to talk about the ugly phase of artwork, because again, TTRPGs are art. They are an artistic medium. You are creating something from nothing, and it is designed to provoke emotions and inspire people. And that is, to my mind, artwork, right? So, and every piece of art has an ugly phase. It has a place in the process where you look at that and you go, oh my God, what did I do? This is terrible. Um, and that's something I never talk about on my Monday night stream because I have that thought a lot when I am getting ready to sit down to run that stream for everybody. As I look at something that's half done and I think, oh my goodness, I've messed it all up. How am I going to fix this for everybody? I'm going to have everybody watching and I'm just going to be staring at blank space. What am I doing? I don't have any talent. I have no idea how I got to this point or where we're going to go from here. And yet, after 37 weeks of that, of our Monday night live streams, not a single one of them has been dead air yet. So, uh, that comes from trusting the process because everything you create is going to look like crap to you at some point. And that's something that I didn't realize. Um, and Jonathan Frost, stop that imposter syndrome BS, dude. Yeah, in therapy for that, friend. Working on it. I have fun too. And every time we jump into there and we actually get into it, all that goes away because it's trusting the process. We're trusting the process that it's going to work out because art always works out. You just have to work your way through it. So that's where that you're making my point for me, Jonathan, and I appreciate that, is that it's about showing up and doing the work because your inner critic is going to tell you things that aren't true. It's going to try to extrapolate an end result from a midpoint that is just not accurate. And I didn't realize that there was a term for what I was experiencing there other than imposter syndrome. And we all experience that. But that ugly phase is something that I pulled from visual arts. A lot of visual artists talk about the ugly phase, right? That your art goes through, and that it's just about trusting that that's part of the process of making something beautiful. And so one of the things that we don't get to talk about in TTRPGs is that when you hit that ugly phase, keep going. Don't give up. Don't erase it all. Don't toss it in the trash. Don't think that you can't make it or that what you have is no good and you need to start over. It's just part of the process. Ray Case, none of us have talent. We just do lots of work to do better. Lots of work to do to be better. How do you make great art? You make yourself great and make art. Gosh, that you have no idea how healthy it is. That your approach and your answer to that is. That's exactly the point, right? There are no great artists. There's just great feeling, right? There's just great passion that you put into your work. So trust yourself, no matter what level you are in the process. And I don't get to say this enough. And it's part of the reason why I really wanted to do tonight was to say to all of you that if you've ever had a moment where you are working on your own TTRPG adventures and they just don't feel like they're working, you don't feel like you've got the information you need, or you don't feel like you know where to go next, trust yourself and just keep going because they're going to be awesome. Trust the process. It always, always works out. So, we got a little extra time. We can go a little over. Let's talk a little bit about the last thing that I wanted to touch on here, and this is editing yourself, because this comes back to that internal critic as well, right? Because once you have created something that is, that is an adventure, something you want to put in front of your players, it's worthwhile to give yourself another look over. And it's not to go through and find out what's wrong or bad with it. I think that something we think about in the editing space is fixing stuff. And I think in TTRPGs, it's not so much about fixing the thing that you've created. I think it's more about looking at it with fresh eyes and discovering things you hadn't thought of yet when you are working in sort of on editing something that you've created. So one of the things that, since we don't really do the edits on our Monday night streams, because let's be honest, it's not sexy to watch me sit there and work on my spelling and my grammar and restructure sentences and what have you. But the real value to editing especially in a TTRPG space where you're writing an adventure for yourself that you're going to deliver in your own way to your players. The real value of editing is not getting all of your grammar right or having the perfect metaphor for your descriptions. It's about uncovering that next layer to your adventure, that going back through with fresh eyes and seeing all of the little things that you were too in the weeds to notice before. All of the little beautiful moments that where your players are going to latch onto because they haven't seen any of this stuff before. They're experiencing it for the first time, and realizing that you've created other cool little attachment points, other cool little story threads that are in there that you hadn't realized. And so to do that, I highly recommend giving yourself a little bit of time to breathe after you create an adventure. Now, if you're like a lot of DMs and you're writing the adventure, we played this week and now I'm writing the adventure for next week. That comes down to don't write it the day before. Write it like 2 days before. Give yourself a night to sleep on it if you can, where you can kind of get out of the weeds, get out of your initial thought process for something that you're examining, and give yourself some time to get into a different headspace, and then go back through and read through it. You don't need to give yourself a whole lot of time. I highly recommend giving yourself just a night to sleep on it. Give yourself that amount of time to actually rest before you jump back into it. So that you can kind of get yourself back to a clean slate and look at it with truly new eyes. And you're going to find all kinds of other layers to the thing that you created. And it's pretty spectacular. But again, we don't really talk about editing in the TTRPG space because we're making stuff so fast that I think that it kind of gets brushed under the rug. But it's absolutely worth taking a little bit of time to check in on your own work and to see the things that you did really well. Amanda Sterner, 2 days, I need a week. That's not uncommon. And again, that's knowing yourself, that's knowing your process. How far out do you need to plan? Um, taking a week, there's nothing wrong with that. In fiction, they talk about taking 4 to 5 weeks before you go back through and do something. But I think in TTRPGs, we're on a much tighter turnaround time than that. And one of the things that I do professionally is I ghostwrite. And ghostwrite blogs for companies. And I have found that giving myself a night to sleep on something, I reveal so much more to me during the editing process than if I just try to kind of roll through and do it right after I finish. And I found as I applied that to TTRPGs that it made a big difference in my games. I started finding things in there that made for really cool moments that I just didn't see when I was creating initially. I just didn't have the distance. Well, to that end, we are at our time for this live stream. Thank you all so much for sticking with me. It has, as always, been a pleasure to kind of hang out and chat with you all on here and hear your thoughts. If you enjoy my content and you're new here, please check out the Monday night streams where we actually do the creative process in real time, building a campaign step by step, all warts and all, as it were, so you can see. Otherwise, I hope you enjoyed this. Please like, subscribe, leave a comment. All that kind of stuff helps me grow the channel and gets more people involved in this. And so I appreciate all that interaction from you all. And if you ever want to check out how I run my games, come find me at startplaying.games/GM/rjcurrer and come play an adventure with me. I'd love to get to meet all of you at the table for real, as much as I value our time and chat here. So thanks again, and I will see you all on Monday.